Now, Prince Andrew followed that procedure to a degree, but then after 5 o'clock, when the working palace closed down, his private guests would turn up.
One of which could result in a historic change to the line of succession. So there are growing reports that the British royal family and King Charles himself is advocating for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to remove himself from the line of succession. So it wouldn't have to be a show of force by the British government in order to do this.
The fact of the matter is that somebody very cleverly took that photograph. It wasn't, as far as I remember, nor do my security people remember anybody being present or close, because there were enough security around. I mean, there are even photographs of the security people are around in the photograph. So, I mean, he could have done it.
I found when I was researching the book, a lot of people were happy to talk to me from the Navy, for example, and diplomats, because they were appalled about the cover-up and how Andrew had been protected. But I think the public, as they become aware, I mean, clearly first with the publication of my book in August, and then with the sort of series of revelations since then in the media, I think they hadn't realised how bad the problem was, particularly, I think, with Sarah Ferguson, who'd always had this reputation as a slightly ditzy, but rather good-hearted woman.
But they never happened.
But it's a bit rude for me to tell you one, I'll tell you, but you're not going to be able to air it. It was just called...
They told Prince Andrew he had to leave, pushed out of Royal Lodge, the massive estate he had clung to for decades with everything he had. But this wasn't just about losing a house. This was the final, very public chapter of a much deeper story that had been building behind closed doors for years. Because this wasn't about property lines or legal paperwork. It was about something far more serious, a pattern of behavior that kept repeating, refusing to change, and eventually spilling into public view. A story of entitlement, resistance, and a refusal to step back even when the pressure kept rising. Welcome to Crownara, where royal drama gets broken down piece by piece, and trust me, you do not want to miss what unfolds next. Subscribe now and stay with the channel for the latest twists, major claims, and non-stop royal updates. And here's the part that really stands out. The real conflict was never about space. It was about control, status, and identity. Something far more difficult to let go of. We're talking about the version of Prince Andrew that most people never fully saw. Not the official image, but the one described by those who were actually around him, and what that reveals about his downfall and what it could mean for the monarchy moving forward is impossible to ignore. For years, Andrew lived what many would call a protected life. He was Queen Elizabeth II's second son, often rumored to be her favorite. A Falklands War veteran with real military experience, he held major public roles, served as a UK trade envoy, and carried himself like someone firmly rooted inside the system. And for a long time, the institution stood behind him, smoothing over awkward moments, absorbing criticism, and keeping things steady on the surface. From the outside, he looked untouchable, but that carefully managed image didn't break overnight. It started with small cracks, quiet observations, subtle concerns from people who worked closely with him every day. And those weren't just random complaints or one-off disagreements. What began to surface was something far more consistent and far more difficult to ignore. Imagine working for someone who truly believes the rules don't apply to them.
The pressure on this is building after a new viral interview, which was conducted a number of months ago by James English, but is only being picked up now. And it's by the prestigious royal author Andrew Lowney, whose book Entitled started this whole current downfall of the former Duke of York.
Someone who treats service like a guaranteed right and basic courtesy like it's optional. That's the picture starting to form from people who were actually there. Former palace staff, press officers, protection officers, senior aides, all began sharing accounts that sounded surprisingly similar. Not dramatic betrayals, not exaggerated claims, just small, revealing moments that kept adding up. And once you start lining up those voices across different roles and different years, it becomes hard to ignore. This wasn't random talk. It was a pattern taking shape in real time. And this is where things take an unexpected turn. Take Dickie Arbiter, for example, a man known for fiercely protecting the late Queen's image. He's not someone who casually criticizes royals. In fact, He's spoken positively about King Charles and even expressed admiration for Princess Diana. So when someone like him suggests that palace press staff might feel relieved they no longer have to defend Prince Andrew, that hits hard. That's not casual criticism. That's a signal, a clear indication of how isolated Andrew's reputation had become, even within circles that rarely speak out. But the press office only tells part of the story. The more revealing accounts came from those who worked closest to him, people whose job wasn't public image, but direct interaction. Take Di Davies, a former senior royal protection officer responsible for the Queen's safety. He described most members of the royal family as respectful and easy to work with. He even spoke well of Charles and Diana, but when it came to Andrew, the tone shifted. Davies recalled a moment where Andrew made a call and demanded to be put through to the boss, only to be told he was already speaking to the person in charge.
Was there any sign from Andrew that he'd be willing to do that?
Well, I think that he'd been made an offer he can't refuse, because in the end, he is totally dependent
On his brother?
Exactly.
I mean, do you think...
A small moment on the surface, but it says a lot because it shows something deeper, an assumption of authority, an expectation of control, and frustration the second that expectation is challenged. And when Davies later described him as boring and ignorant, it carried weight, not because it was dramatic, but because it came from someone trained to stay measured and observant. Now here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. The Clarence House account, one of the clearest glimpses into everyday behavior. Andrew Colin Burgess, who worked closely within royal households, reportedly described a moment where Andrew entered a room and, without any basic politeness, pointed and gave a blunt command. "You, wrap that." No greeting, no acknowledgement, just an order. And it's moments like that, short, sharp, and revealing, that start to explain everything. Burgess was reportedly so frustrated. In that moment, he almost snapped back. And that reaction says everything, because this wasn't about one dramatic incident. It was about a pattern of everyday behavior that kept repeating. Not illegal, not headline-grabbing on its own, but something arguably more damaging. A consistent tone, a way of speaking, a habit of treating people that quietly signaled entitlement. Service was expected, but basic respect? That seemed optional. And these are the moments that really matter. Not the polished appearances, not the state visits, but the private interactions where there's no audience, no cameras, no script. That's where real character gets revealed. Inside royal households, those small exchanges carry weight, because when rank fills the room, it can sometimes push everything else out.
And it is only really Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. I mean, the rest of them do a terrific job. So I don't really want to buy product. I describe myself as an honest friend, calling out some of the things that are wrong in order for them to be corrected, in order for the monarchy to survive.
And this wasn't just about personality, it was about power. For years, Andrew wasn't just another royal figure. He held real influence as the UK's special representative for trade and investment. He moved through global business and political circles with confidence. He had access, authority, and a platform that extended far beyond ceremonial duties. And with that came a mindset, a belief that the system would always make space for him, that his position alone was enough to carry him through any situation. But here's where things start to shift. That same confidence, combined with reports of limited engagement or interest in the responsibilities tied to his role, began to create tension. The gap between expectation and performance became harder to ignore. And then the private whispers started to go public. Because this didn't stay behind palace walls forever. Elected officials began speaking out. Figures like former Trade Minister Chris Bryant openly described Andrew as rude, arrogant, and entitled. Strong words, and they weren't said quietly. Bryant even shared a specific example. Andrew reportedly insisting on arriving by helicopter to meet sea cadets, only to leave early and show little engagement with the young people there. Think about that moment. Status first, duty second. That's the impression it leaves. And here's why that matters. Because it wasn't an isolated story.
And so therefore, if you try to forget, it's very difficult to try and forget positive action. And I do not remember anything. I've racked my brain and thinking, oh, well, when the allegations came out originally, I went, well, that's a bit strange, I don't remember this. And then I've been through it and through it and through it over and over and over again.
It matched exactly what former staff had been describing for years. Just now, it was happening in full public view. When one aide calls someone demanding, it's easy to dismiss. When a protection officer describes them as difficult, you might see it as a clash of personalities. But when members of parliament begin using the same language in public, on record, that's when everything changes. The quiet concerns turn into something much louder. And once that shift happens, it's no longer just about one individual. It becomes a problem for the institution itself. Because modern monarchy can survive awkward moments, criticism, even controversy. It's done it before. But when credibility starts to crack, that's a much harder thing to repair. What the monarchy really struggles to survive isn't just scandal. It's the perception that it protected, excused, or allowed certain behavior to continue even after the public had already made up its mind. That's where things become difficult to contain. And then came the moment everything shifted, the 2019 Newsnight interview. It was supposed to clear the air, draw a line under the Epstein questions, and offer some kind of reset. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Andrew's explanations about his connection to Jeffrey Epstein and his denial of meeting Virginia Giuffre, despite the widely circulated photo, only deepened public doubt. The more he spoke, the more questions it raised. To be clear, Andrew has consistently denied wrongdoing, and in 2022, he settled the civil case brought by Giuffre without admitting liability, agreeing to a financial settlement and a donation to her charity. Legally, that closed the case, but in terms of public perception, it didn't resolve anything. If anything, it marked a turning point.
And just time and time again, she was proved to be correct and Andrew was proved to be a liar.
Because from that moment on, the focus inside the palace appeared to shift. It was no longer about restoring Andrew's image. It became about creating distance. And that distancing didn't happen all at once. It came step by step. First, his military roles and royal patronages were removed. Then came the end of his use of HRH in any official capacity. Each move tightening the line just a little more. But that led to a bigger, more complicated question. What do you do with a royal who no longer has a public role, but still lives within royal spaces, uses royal resources, and remains tied to royal identity? And that's exactly why Royal Lodge matters so much. On the surface, it might look like a simple housing issue, a disagreement over property, but underneath, it represents something much bigger.
People are too frightened to take the complaints higher up the chain. Bearing in mind Prince Andrew was the Queen's favourite, no one would dare, make an issue with regards to his attitude.
Is he an intimidating figure in his own right?
I'd say so, yeah. I mean, I can give you numerous incidents of us doing our job and basically being lambasted for following procedure.
It's about what Andrew still believes he's entitled to. Residence, security, visibility, and what King Charles is willing or able to justify moving forward. Because let's be honest, King Charles has made it clear he wants a slimmer, more focused monarchy, one that's easier to defend, easier to explain, and more aligned with modern expectations. And Andrew, he sits right in the middle of that challenge, not just as a family issue, but as a public-facing problem that directly clashes with that vision. At the same time, there's a human side to all of this that can't be ignored. Because beyond the institution, Andrew is still the king's brother and the late queen's son. That reality complicates everything. So the question becomes, how do you balance accountability with family loyalty? How do you remove privilege without creating a sense of internal conflict or sympathy? It's not a simple decision, and instead of one dramatic break, what we're seeing is something much quieter, but just as powerful. A slow, steady tightening of boundaries, one step at a time. Less role, less visibility, less tolerance, and most importantly, less space. That's the direction everything has been moving in, and even now, it still hasn't fully resolved the issue because the conversation has shifted again, and this time it's gone way beyond titles or property.
He himself, not as it were as close as you might think. We weren't that close. So therefore, I mean, yes, I would go and stay in his house, but that was because of his girlfriend, not because of him.
It's now entering constitutional territory. Members of Parliament, including Ed Davey and Luke Taylor, have openly questioned whether Andrew should remain in the line of succession at all. That's not a small debate. That's a major shift. Davey stated that Andrew had brought shame to both the country and the royal family. Taylor went even further, arguing that the idea of him remaining in line to become head of state is simply unacceptable. So this is no longer about where Andrew lives or whether he appears at royal events. It's about whether the system itself should continue to carry him, whether the monarchy can truly move forward while still holding on to parts of its past that no longer fit. Now let's be clear. Removing someone from the line of succession isn't simple. It would be legally complex, politically sensitive, and incredibly rare. But the fact that this is now being discussed openly, that says everything. It shows just how dramatically Andrew's position has changed. And maybe that's where the real story sits. Because this isn't just about staff describing him as difficult, or even about the scandals that followed. It's about how those earlier patterns now look in hindsight. The impatience, the entitlement, the constant need to assert rank, the sense that rules didn't quite apply in the same way. For years, those traits were contained within the system. In a monarchy built on hierarchy and tradition, they could exist without causing major disruption, as long as the public image held strong. But once that image broke, everything changed. Those same behaviors stopped looking like personality quirks and started looking like part of a much bigger problem. And that's what makes this more than just one individual story, because Andrew's downfall isn't only about a single royal figure losing status. It reflects something deeper about the institution itself. The monarchy, one of the oldest and most carefully managed institutions in the world, is now facing the reality that it can't always shield its own from public judgment. And that shift, it's slow, it's uncomfortable, but it's impossible to ignore. And this is where the situation reaches a whole new level, because once a story moves from internal concern to public debate, and then into political discussion, it doesn't go back to being contained. It grows. What we're seeing now isn't just fallout, it's transformation. The monarchy is being forced to adapt in real time, under pressure, with every decision being watched, questioned, and analyzed. And Andrew's situation sits right at the center of that shift, because for decades, the system was designed to absorb problems quietly.
I think Andrew's on the ropes, so is Sarah Ferguson, and I think people are just hoping to put in the knockout blow.
Handle them behind the scenes, limit exposure, protect the image at all costs. But that approach doesn't hold the same power anymore, not in a world where every detail can surface instantly. And that's the real turning point. Andrew's case has exposed the limits of that old system. It's shown that reputation isn't something that can always be managed from the inside. Once public perception locks in, it becomes incredibly difficult to reverse. And now, every step taken, every restriction, every adjustment, every decision about where he lives or what role he holds feels like part of a much bigger recalibration. Because this isn't just about distancing from one individual. It's about redefining what the monarchy stands for moving forward. What does accountability look like within a royal structure? How much change is enough to maintain trust? And how do you balance tradition with a public that expects transparency? Those are the questions sitting just beneath the surface right now. And the answers? They're still unfolding. And as this continues to unfold, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. The spotlight isn't fading, it's getting sharper. Every new detail adds another layer, and people are paying closer attention than ever before. Because this story has moved beyond headlines, it's become a symbol of something bigger, a test of how far the monarchy is willing to go to protect its future, even when that means making difficult decisions about its own members. And let's be honest, that's where the real tension sits. On one side, you have tradition, loyalty, and family ties that go back generations. On the other, you have public expectation, accountability, and a demand for change that isn't going away. And those two forces don't always align. Andrew's situation sits right in the middle of that clash. Every move now, where he lives, what titles he uses, how visible he is, gets interpreted as a signal, not just about him, but about what the monarchy is willing to tolerate moving forward. And that's why this isn't slowing down, because people aren't just watching what happens, they're watching what it means. So the real question isn't just about Andrew anymore, it's about the direction of the institution itself. What kind of monarchy emerges from this moment? One that adapts and resets, or one that struggles to keep up with the expectations surrounding it?
Unfortunately, Prince Andrew was totally different. He could fly off the handle at the smallest thing. He would be abusive. He would shout, he would swear. So we had a particular issue with Prince Andrew.
Because right now, that answer is still being written. And now we've reached the point where everything connects. Because when you step back and look at the full picture, the history, the behavior, the public reaction, the political pressure, it all points in one direction. Change is no longer optional, it's unavoidable. What once could be handled quietly is now playing out in full view. Every decision carries weight. Every delay raises questions, and every detail gets examined. That level of scrutiny doesn't disappear, it builds. And that's exactly what's happening here. The monarchy is being pushed into a position where it has to clearly define its standards, not just in words, but in action. Because the public isn't just listening anymore, they're watching closely to see if those standards are actually applied. And Andrew's situation has become the ultimate test case. If the institution draws firm lines, it strengthens its credibility. But if those lines appear blurred or inconsistent, it risks losing trust even faster. That's the balancing act. And it's not an easy one. At the same time, this moment is shaping how the next generation will be viewed, because what happens now sets the tone for what comes later. It defines expectations, boundaries, and what is considered acceptable moving forward. So this isn't just about closing a chapter, it's about setting a precedent. And once a precedent is set at this level, it doesn't just affect one person, it reshapes the entire system. That's why this moment matters so much, and why people aren't looking away. And that brings everything down to one final question.
I can absolutely categorically tell you it never happened.
Do you recall any kind of sexual contact with Virginia Roberts then
None,
or any other time?
None whatsoever.
Because she said in a legal deposition, a legal court document in 2015, she had sex with you 3 times. She is not confused about this.
Were those early accounts just small glimpses of a difficult personality, something people quietly learned to work around for years? Or were they warning signs of a much bigger problem that eventually became impossible to ignore? Because if the monarchy is serious about presenting a slimmer, more accountable future, then this question can't be avoided. How long can it carry unresolved issues from the past without it affecting its credibility? That's where the real pressure sits. In the end, Royal Lodge was never just about a house. It was a symbol of status, expectation, and a way of thinking that may not fit the direction the monarchy is trying to move toward. And what those former staff were describing wasn't just bad behavior, it pointed to something deeper, a mindset built over time. That helps explain why this situation hasn't simply faded away. Because even now, after everything, the Andrew issue still lingers, and that says more than any headline ever could. If this made you think, drop your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives like this, because stories like this are far from over.